Okay, this video is going to take us all on a quick photo tour of some computers and things that are a bit like computers from history. We'll start ages ago. Let's start in ancient China. That, as you probably can tell, is an abacus. So for ages humans have used machines, devices, things like this abacus to help with mundane, boring tasks like adding up. Because basically all a computer can do is add up, subtract, and very little else. So for ages we've had these sort of machines around. When humans got a little bit better at building machines, we got things like this. Now this, it might not be immediately obvious what it is, but it's a loom. It's a loom for making patterned cloth. And if you look at those little rolls in the front, you can see holes in them. If you remember those ones and noughts, well, a hole in there is a 1, and the absence of a hole is a nought. That's a jacquard loom, and it was invented for making cloth with patterns that could be repeated over and over again very effectively, which is something a machine is obviously good at, whereas a human is significantly worse. Humans don't like repetitive tasks. And that's exactly what led to the production of this thing. This thing is probably the world's first computer. It's actually a reproduction, this picture, of the device in the Science Museum in London. It's the difference engine produced by Charles Babbage. And if you look at it on the right hand side there, you can probably just make out the crank handle that turns it, and all those things in the middle have got dials on with numbers and so on. What this machine does is simple adding up. It was designed for creating mathematical tables. It was designed, again, very repetitive, boring, dull task that humans are very bad at because they make mistakes, and machines like this are very good at because they will keep going and they will never make a mistake. We'll meet the bloke who designed this machine a bit later on, but at the moment that was the first computer. Let's step right forward into the days of electricity. That's a very early computer, actually a computer called ENIAC. Look at all those wires on the front. You can imagine all the valves, the amount of power this thing used to use. The word is that when this thing was turned on, all the lights in the neighbourhood used to dim. And the processing power this thing had, the stuff it could do, significantly less than your mobile phone. But ENIAC, which was around in the 40s, is generally regarded again as one of the first electronic computers. We say the 40s, of course, because that was the time when there was a war on, and as we'll see later on, we look at some of the important figures involved in history. War drives technology, and war drove the development of computers like this. But obviously, after the war, people began to appreciate there were non-military applications. And you would get things like this. I'm guessing this is the 1950s by the fashions, and you can maybe just make out that these machines have IBM written on them, and IBM are obviously still going now. I'm not entirely sure what it is they're using there. It's probably something like a disk drive. But this is a typical 1950s style image of what computing is like. It's a large beast being tended to, and it's doing, again, repetitive adding up tasks like payroll, office automation and things. I like this picture. If you can't read the text across the bottom, what it says is that scientists from the Rand Corporation have created that model to illustrate how a home computer will look in the year 2004. So from where we are, that's 4 years ago. This was for them 50 years in the future. It says, however, the technology will not be economically feasible for the average home. Just imagine the number of computers now in the average home. And the scientists readily admit that the computer will require not yet invented technology. So, alright, we can laugh at this now, but let's just think, this is 1954 and they're trying to imagine what computers will be like in 50 years' time. What are computers going to be like in 50 years' time from now? What will they do? What will they look like? This is the 60s. This is a typical mainframe computer, and again you can see the sort of imagery. It's almost science fiction or Star Trek, isn't it? There are two people tending this mysterious device, and that's how it would have been in many organisations. There was a computer somewhere. Moving slightly on, this is 1970s, again, you can tell from the fashions, and that's a PDP-11. I put that in because that's one of the first computers I used in this university. This university used to have quite a lot of PDP-11s around. Again, imagine the processing power these did or possibly didn't have. This is a very venerable computer. This is a ZX81 Micro from 1981. And again, I've put this in because this is the first computer I ever used and ever actually did anything with. This was the start of the home micro revolution, where it suddenly became possible for ordinary people to have computers in their home. There would be adverts in the Radio Times and newspapers to buy either one of these or a kit to make one of these. You'd send away, spend about £60, and you'd get a computer. This computer has got an amazing 1K of memory. That's 1024 bits, which is maybe a second or so of your MP3 track these days. But this is, again, 1981, so it was quite serious and quite impressive stuff. You can't see a display in this picture. That's because the display was the television set. And you can't see a mouse because, well, mice hadn't really been invented for this sort of machine at the time. This was the competitor to the ZX81, to the Commodore 64. It looks just like a keyboard with nothing else attached to it really. But inside that box there is a circuit board, central processing unit, all the things you need to be a computer. And again, the display was the television screen. And this was the follow-on for ZX81 and the second computer I ever used, to ZX Spectrum. This came out in about 1985 and had an astonishing 16K of memory, unless you could afford the 48K memory version. And, well, there it is. Very nice rubber keyboard. The difference between this and the ZX81 is this is in colour. Again, it's using your television to display things, and you were storing your programs on ordinary audio cassette tapes. We didn't have floppy disks or anything like that at the time. Of course, the people in the commercial world were using things like this. This is one of the very first IBM PCs. On the front there are two floppy drives, both capable of storing something like 740K. You've got a keyboard, you haven't got a mouse, because, again, they haven't quite been invented yet, because this is before Windows became so popular. And you've got a single teletype display, which is going to show you 80 by 24 grid of characters. This would have been a typical office machine in about 1985, 1986. Again, the processing power these days, what are we, only 20 years on, this was really very insignificant in terms of processing power. As now, of course, desktop machines look like this. Think back to that 1954 image of what people 54 years ago thought a home computer would look like, and that's what a home computer would look like these days. It's a standard Dell desktop PC. And just compare the processing power that thing has probably got compared to what they thought we would have in 1954, and imagine what we'll have in 50 years' time. Just to finish off, there are some interesting developments afoot in the world of PCs. This is something called an EPC. It's something that people are referring to as small, cheap computers. These things cost about £200, something like that. They've got wireless internet on them. You can surf the web, you can write your documents, you can travel files around them, and they're about the size of a paperback book. So one of the interesting recent developments has been lots of companies rushing to produce very small, very cheap computers that people will almost regard as disposable commodity. This one's also worthy of note. When you finish viewing this, look up the One Laptop Per Child project, or OLPC. This is an OLPC. It's a computer that's being developed in the States, and the aim of the project is to develop a computer that can be given free to children, so in Africa, Third World and so on, in an attempt to close what some people call the digital divide. So have a look at that and have a read up about the OLPC project. And again, thinking of that 1954 picture, here's a modern laptop computer. It's actually a MacBook Air, and just imagine how far we have come from that or from the abacus. Right. Having looked at all the computers, the next stage is to look at some of the people behind them, and from that we can start to understand how it is we've got to where we are and where we might go in the future.